Welcome back to Mindful Restarts. Don't forget to visit our website for 40% off the Mindful Bundle. The current situation regarding tariffs between Mexico, the United States, and Canada is shaped by a complex web of historical events, trade agreements, economic interests, and geopolitical considerations. The relationships between these three North American nations have evolved over centuries, with fluctuating tariffs playing a central role in the economic and political dynamics. To understand the contemporary context, it is crucial to examine the historical backdrop, the current situation regarding tariffs, and the perspectives of each country. This analysis will also explore potential solutions that could benefit all parties. Historical context of trade relations. 1. Early trade and protectionism, pre-20th century. The trade relations between the United States, Canada, and Mexico have deep historical roots. In the early 19th century, trade between the U.S. and Canada was limited by the lack of modern transportation and infrastructure. However, following the War of 1812 and the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, the U.S. and Canada began establishing trade relations. Despite this, tariffs were a common tool for both nations to protect their burgeoning economies from foreign competition. Mexico's relationship with the U.S. began to evolve in the early 19th century as well, especially after Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821. The U.S. imposed tariffs on Mexican goods, but the two countries began to establish stronger economic ties, as Mexico's economy was largely agrarian and reliant on trade for growth. However, political instability and territorial disputes often interrupted trade relations between the two nations. 2. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA era, 1994 to 2020. A pivotal moment in the trade relationships between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada came in 1994 with the establishment of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. This agreement was designed to reduce or eliminate tariffs and trade barriers between the three countries, aiming to create a more integrated and competitive economic region. NAFTA was widely regarded as a monumental step in trade liberalization, encouraging cross-border investment, job creation, and economic growth. Under NAFTA, tariffs were phased out on most goods traded between the three countries. Mexico, in particular, benefited significantly from this agreement, as it opened up access to the vast U.S. market for Mexican exports, particularly in manufacturing, agriculture, and energy sectors. Canada also experienced increased trade opportunities, especially in sectors such as energy and natural resources. However, NAFTA was not without its critics. Many U.S. labor unions and political figures argued that the agreement resulted in the outsourcing of jobs, particularly in manufacturing, as companies took advantage of cheaper labor costs in Mexico. Critics of NAFTA also raised concerns about environmental and labor standards, fearing that the agreement undermined protections for workers and the environment in favor of economic growth. 3. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. In 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump began a series of trade negotiations aimed at replacing NAFTA with a new deal that would address what he considered to be the imbalances and disadvantages of the previous agreement. The result was the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which was signed in 2019 and entered into force in 2020. The USMCA made several key changes compared to NAFTA, particularly in the areas of agriculture, manufacturing, and digital trade. One notable aspect was the introduction of stricter rules of origin for vehicles, requiring a higher percentage of a vehicle's parts to be sourced from North America. The agreement also included provisions to strengthen labor rights, particularly in Mexico, where labor standards were often seen as lower than those in Canada and the U.S. Additionally, the USMCA included a new chapter on digital trade, reflecting the growing importance of technology and e-commerce in the global economy. Despite these changes, the USMCA did not eliminate tariffs completely, particularly in certain sectors. For instance, tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada and Mexico were introduced under the Trump administration, causing tensions between the U.S. and its neighbors. Current tariff situation. Under the USMCA, many of the tariff barriers that existed under NAFTA were eliminated, but certain tariffs remain. The ongoing issue of steel and aluminum tariffs is a prime example of this. In 2018, President Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from various countries, including Canada and Mexico, citing national security concerns. Both Canada and Mexico strongly opposed these tariffs, arguing that they were unjustified and harmful to their economies. The tariffs were eventually lifted in 2020, but the legacy of these trade disputes continues to shape the economic relations between the three countries. Another area of contention is the agricultural sector, where the U.S. has imposed tariffs on certain Mexican products, such as tomatoes and steel, and where Canada has raised concerns about dairy tariffs. U.S. perspective on tariffs. From the U.S. perspective, tariffs serve as a tool to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. The Trump administration was particularly vocal about the need to address what it perceived as unfair trade practices, particularly with China and Mexico. Trump's stance on tariffs was based on the belief that free trade agreements like NAFTA had led to the outsourcing of U.S. jobs, particularly in manufacturing sectors. While the Biden administration has taken a more multilateral approach to trade, it has not completely abandoned the use of tariffs. For example, the Biden administration has maintained certain tariffs on Chinese imports and continues to review the impact of tariffs on steel and aluminum. The U.S. government argues that tariffs on certain goods protect American workers, promote domestic manufacturing, and reduce trade deficits. From the perspective of U.S. workers and industries, the imposition of tariffs can help safeguard jobs in sectors such as steel and manufacturing. However, critics argue that tariffs often lead to higher prices for consumers and may hurt American industries that rely on imported materials. Mexico's perspective on tariffs. Mexico has historically been a strong advocate of free trade, and its economy has become increasingly integrated with the U.S. and Canada through the mechanisms of NAFTA and the USMCA. The elimination of most tariffs under NAFTA was seen as a major victory for Mexico, as it provided greater access to the U.S. market for Mexican products, particularly in agriculture and manufacturing. However, the imposition of tariffs under the Trump administration caused significant disruptions in Mexico's economy. The tariffs on steel and aluminum, for example, hurt Mexican exporters and manufacturers, while also leading to retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. Mexico's agricultural sector, particularly its tomato and avocado exports, also faced challenges as a result of U.S. tariffs. Mexico has called for the reduction of such tariffs under the USMCA and has sought ways to resolve disputes through the agreement's dispute resolution mechanisms. Mexico's government views tariffs as a threat to its economic growth and stability, particularly since the country's manufacturing sector relies heavily on access to U.S. markets. However, Mexico also seeks to maintain trade relations with other regions, such as Europe and Latin America, in order to diversify its economic partnerships and reduce dependence on the U.S.-Canada's perspective on tariffs. Canada's economic relationship with the U.S. is characterized by close integration, particularly in the energy, automotive, and agricultural sectors. As the largest trading partner of the U.S., Canada has been a strong proponent of free trade, and NAFTA was a crucial agreement in maintaining open access to U.S. markets. However, Canada also faced significant challenges under the Trump administration, particularly with the imposition of steel and aluminum tariffs. In response, Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs on a range of U.S. products, including steel, aluminum, and agricultural goods. These tariffs were seen as a means of protecting Canada's economic interests and responding to what it perceived as unfair treatment under U.S. trade policies. From Canada's perspective, tariffs undermine the benefits of free trade and hurt both consumers and businesses. However, Canada has also benefited from the USMCA, particularly in areas such as dairy and agricultural products, where the agreement provided more favorable terms for Canadian exports. Despite these benefits, Canada's government continues to seek the elimination of tariffs and other trade barriers in order to ensure continued economic growth. Potential solutions and compromises. 1. Phased elimination of tariffs. One potential solution to the current tariff impasse would be the gradual elimination of tariffs on certain goods over time. This would allow industries in all three countries to adjust to the changes and would reduce the immediate economic impact on businesses and consumers. Such a gradual approach could be particularly beneficial in sectors like steel and aluminum, where tariffs have been most contentious. 1. Enhanced dispute resolution mechanisms. While the USMCA includes provisions for resolving trade disputes, there is still a need for stronger and more transparent mechanisms for addressing tariff-related issues. By establishing clearer guidelines for when and how tariffs should be imposed, all parties could reduce the likelihood of retaliatory measures and ensure that trade policies are based on fair and justifiable grounds. 1. Sector-specific tariff adjustments. Another potential solution would be to adopt a more sector-specific approach to tariffs, focusing on industries where tariffs are most necessary to protect domestic interests. For example, tariffs on sensitive sectors like steel and aluminum could be maintained, while tariffs on agricultural or consumer goods could be reduced or eliminated. 1. Increased cooperation on trade policy. A more cooperative approach to trade policy could also benefit all three countries. This could involve regular consultations between Mexico, the US, and Canada to address common trade challenges, identify opportunities for collaboration, and resolve disputes before they escalate into larger trade conflicts. A coordinated approach to global trade issues, such as climate change or digital trade, could also create opportunities for further collaboration. Conclusion. The current tariff situation between Mexico, the US, and Canada reflects the complexities of international trade relations and the diverse interests of each country. While the USMCA represents a step forward in fostering trade cooperation, tariffs continue to be a point of contention. By taking a more collaborative approach to trade policy, engaging in phased tariff reductions, and strengthening dispute resolution mechanisms, all three countries can create a more stable and prosperous economic environment.